Hello everyone, welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott, also known as Cineram here on YouTube. I do Thursday review videos for this collab channel, and I'm pleased to report that we have recently cleared 800 subscribers. Thank you all very, very much for continuing to tune in to us every week. Really appreciate it, all you guys who are new to the channel. We do themes every week, as you might have guessed by now. This week's theme is trilogies, movie trilogies. The trend has not really been to review any one particular trilogy, but just talk about trilogies in general, and in fact, what makes a good trilogy, what makes a bad trilogy, what exactly is a trilogy? Well, you know, it's obviously 3 movies. Preferably all related to the same group of characters, or a specific character perhaps, with you know, ideally the same talent in front of and behind the camera. Of course there are exceptions to that rule, but I find that lately it seems that there are a lot of big event films, big blockbuster type wannabes, you know, that are geared with a particular franchise in mind. If they're not planning on doing 3 movies, they're planning on doing 5 or 8, or, you know, a whole series of them. Perhaps the trilogies that I admire the most, going back to when I was a kid, would be the classic Star Wars trilogy with Luke, Leia, and Han Solo, and the unofficial Star Trek trilogy, which begins with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, continues on through Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and concludes with Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Technically, it's not, you know, you would say that maybe the first one was a part of the trilogy, but really all 3 of those storylines go together, because you have the death of Spock in Part 2, you have the journeying back to Genesis to retrieve him, because as it turns out he's still alive, in Part 3, and in Part 4, of course, they make their way home only to be interrupted by the space probe, and they have to travel back in time to 1986 San Francisco in order to retrieve the whales. But things end up relatively happily at the end of 4. So those 3 right there could be considered a trilogy. I have a good friend here on YouTube, Michael, in Canada. His channel is called Red Chair, and I did a video actually talking about trilogies. This was back when I did a review of The Dark Knight Rises, because the Christopher Nolan trilogy just wrapped up. And I asked people who were watching me, what's your favorite movie trilogy? Why is it your favorite? And Michael suggested Goldfinger and the 2 James Bond movies starring Sean Connery that came immediately after that. I can't remember exactly which ones they are, but I believe that one of them was Thunderball, and the one after that was You Only Live Twice. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to check. But you know, Connery's appeared in a number of the earliest James Bond movies, and you know, the 2 that started off with Dr. No and From Russia with Love, if I'm not mistaken. So Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice, I believe those are the ones that came after that, would be like a good James Bond trilogy. So at some point I'm going to have to rent all 3 of those movies and watch them to see if he's right about that, or at least to get what he means by that. Trilogies, I was really looking forward, obviously, to the Batman trilogy that Christopher Nolan did. And I love Batman Begins, but I'm not nearly as big a fan of The Dark Knight. It's got, you know, great moments, but there's I have a little problems with it, and I have even more problems with The Dark Knight Rises, so that wouldn't be a big trilogy for me, not one of my favorites. Unlike many people who love The Dark Knight Rises, and The Dark Knight especially, think it's a fantastic trilogy. I love Christopher Nolan. He's a terrific director, but you know, those other 2 films just didn't work for me, whereas practically every other movie he's made is great. Of course, The Lord of the Rings is also one that everyone likes. In fact, I think both Ray and Al talked about that in the earlier videos this week. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is this massive undertaking. Peter Jackson, who's from New Zealand, shot all 3 movies within the span of like 15 months, all at once basically, so he could keep the core cast together, and then release them 1 year at a time. Now, I was looking forward to these movies because I was a big fan of Peter Jackson, but I didn't realize exactly what I was getting into, because at the end of the first movie, I saw that there was still quite a ways to go before they got to Ring to Mordor, and I'm like, wait a minute, you mean they're not going to get the ring into the volcano in this trilogy. They're going to take all three movies, all three of these massive, long 3-hour movies, to get the ring all the way to the end. I mean, technically, the movies are pretty amazing, but I've always felt like that particular trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is one of the most overindulgent and unnecessarily prolonged movie series. I mean, each movie is at least 3 hours long, and if you take the extended editions into account, you're talking 11 and a half hours for 3 movies, 11 and a half hours for them to finally get there. Which the movie takes place over the course of about 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, the series. But still, I mean, if they had done it faster pace, sort of Goodfellas style, they could have done the entire thing in one go, one film. Of course, a lot of people don't agree with me on that. They think that, all 3 movies are fantastic and that it's worthy of spending that much time. I was reading recently about adaptations and how important it is these days for filmmakers who make an adaptation from a greatly loved novel, a greatly loved series like Harry Potter and Twilight and the classic comic book characters, that they be faithful to the storyline, that they adhere very, very closally to the dynamics of all the characters, and that they follow the storyline and all the particular events very, very closely. And obviously Peter Jackson did a really good job doing that, which is why the movies are so incredibly long. He moved some events around, yes, but still, I mean, it's undoubtedly, on the whole, very, very faithful. And the problem is that with these being movies, they just work differently from books. For example, Cloud Atlas, which I reviewed a few weeks ago. Cloud Atlas is an adaptation where they didn't feel, the filmmakers, the Wachowskis and Tom Tykwer, didn't feel like they could literally translate the novel as it was structured, because in that instance, you have basically the first half of story 1 and the first half of story 2 and the first half of story 3 all the way to story 6, at which point they show the second half of story 6. This is in the book, mind you. And the second half of story 5 and the second half of story 4 until they finally get to the second half of story 1, and then the novel is over. And they realized they didn't want to do that because, it would mean restarting stories over and over again. That might work if you're reading a book, but not with a film. So they decided instead to cross-cut between all 6 storylines throughout the entire picture, and I thought that worked, on the whole, very well. That is an example of adaptation. Adapting something that wouldn't work as well on the screen into a form that would make it work better. And that's what I think that Peter Jackson didn't do with the Lord of the Rings films. When he could have, cut characters, or invented new scenarios, whatever, the basic story itself could remain the same without adhering so very, very diligently to every single little thing that happens and all these characters. I mean, he did cut characters, but in my opinion, he could have cut a lot more, and he could have sped things up, and he could have done the entire thing in just one film rather than dragging the entire thing out over the course of 3 Christmas seasons and 3 really long movies. So yeah, not the biggest fan of Lord of the Rings. But one trilogy that I am a big fan of, that doesn't get mentioned a lot, is the Scream trilogy. And Scream is a much more modestly ambitious film than Lord of the Rings or Pirates of the Caribbean or the Star Wars movies or, Dark Knight, anything like that. Because it involves a small group of characters, and there's no big, incredible CGI set pieces, and each movie is under 2 hours. And they're all really, really cleverly written. They're not spectacle-driven, they are more dialogue-driven than anything else. And character-driven, which I think is very important. And every time a new Scream film has come out, I've been very, very interested to see what's going on with them. I mean, with Jason Bourne, it was like, Jason Bourne, he's going to, find some information, and then guys are going to chase after him, he's going to fight them off, and he's going to run away, and, those movies basically are, a lot of them are really the same. I like the movies, except for the third one. Not really big on the third one. The first 2 are excellent. But Scream, for me, has been consistently enjoyable in each installment. Now, when 4 came out, it was like 10, 11 years after 3. And I liked that one more initially because, unlike the premise of Scream, of course, is that the Neve Campbell character, Sidney Prescott, and some of her friends are being terrorized by this anonymous killer. And in each film, you find out that the killer, of course, is a different person, but they've taken on the persona of the ghost-faced character with the mask and the hood and the voice changer. But in the first movie, the primary person who's terrorizing them is actually someone that they know quite well. Whereas in the second and third movies, it's more of an incidental character who pops up as the villain at the end, especially 3. There's no way that anyone could possibly guess who the villain was in 3. At least they couldn't, based on what the characters have to go by, they wouldn't have guessed that. Whereas 4, there was a more significant supporting character who turned out to be the killer in the end. But I still think that the first 3 Scream movies are very, very clever on the whole. 3 especially does something really, really exciting, and I didn't even realize it until after the movie was over. As you know, the killer, whoever it is, uses a voice disguiser, so they always sound the same. They always have that menacing scream killer voice, and they'll use that voice, over the phone to terrorize people and to threaten them and what have you. Well, in the third film, the killer uses a special voice disguiser that actually disguises his or her voice as other characters. It's able to perfectly mimic David Arquette's voice and Neve Campbell's voice and trick other people into thinking they're getting calls from people who aren't actually around. Well, to throw off the audience, the writer, Aaron Kruger, and the director, Wes Craven, decided at one point they were going to have the killer imitate himself. So everyone would think that the killer was imitating someone else, but in fact was actually calling up as himself, as his own persona. Now, there's no way that anyone can know that except the audience. Here's the cops thinking that that they got this guy because he called up and threatened this person. They had testimony from someone else, and the guy's like, no, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. And everyone in the audience is like, it wasn't him, it was the killer. But in fact, the killer was pretending to call as himself, which was very, very, very clever. And something I didn't even realize until after the movie was over and I was on my way home from the theater. My favorite character actor probably in all 3 of those movies is Liev Schreiber. He has a pretty small part in 3, and he only makes a brief appearance in 1, but in 2, he has a lot more screen time and he's really, really great. And just the performance by the guy who does the voice. I can't remember who does the voice of the killer because it isn't actually a disguised voice. It's someone who does voiceover, an actor who performs all that dialogue himself, and he's really great. Yeah, just an all-around really fun series, and always interesting and clever, and yeah, it's just one that I like a lot. There are trilogies that I enjoy, but some of them have weaker episodes than others. As I mentioned, Jason Bourne has kind of a weak 3rd episode, and the same with Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't like the 3rd one quite as much as the others. And with X-Men, X-Men is a trilogy, at least the first 3 movies. A lot of people rip on X-Men The Last Stand. I really don't think it's that bad. It's not as good as the other 2. And people just, I think, don't like Brett Ratner a lot. But it's actually a pretty solid movie. I like the climax quite a lot. I think it's really, really great with everyone storming Alcatraz Island with their plastic weapons to take down Magneto and his whole gang. Some good stuff there. And what else? Yeah, I'm just trying to think of other trilogies. One trilogy I wanted to mention that's kind of obscure. It's called Tetsuo. It's a Japanese trilogy about people who become accidentally wedded with machine parts. Their bodies turn into part machines, and so they grow these cannons and these big armatures and everything like that. And this is all sort of, it's like the Incredible Hulk, where they become very, very angry, upset, and suddenly they sprout these big machine parts and start blasting away everything in sight. It's crazy. It's a crazy trilogy. The most recent episode, The Bullet Man, came out just only like last year, I think, on video. But Tetsuo, the Iron Man, the first episode came out like in the early 90s. And then Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer came out shortly after that. And then just recently, Tetsuo the Bullet Man, which is the 3rd chapter. Crazy, crazy series, really crazy. So that's what I've got to say on trilogies right now. And we've got a new theme starting next week. Well, tomorrow, actually. Friday is when our new theme week starts, so be sure to tune into Al to see what he's got for us. Thank you again very much to everyone who subscribed to us. 800 is a nice big number. Appreciate it very much, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.